On behalf of the Tombrello family and the Division of Physics, Mathematics, and Astronomy, I want to welcome you to this memorial for Tom Tombrello. Tom was born in Austin, Texas in 1936 and educated at Rice Institute. He came to Caltech in 1961 and has been here ever since, except for 2 years, a 2-year stint at Yale as an assistant professor and another 2-year stint at Schlumberger as the vice president and director of research. Tom came to Caltech to do nuclear physics in the Kellogg laboratory, but he did many other things as well. His impact on Caltech went well beyond his research. As the longtime head of the physics staffing committee, he found, promoted, nurtured, and supported many of the members of the current Caltech physics faculty, most of whom are in the audience today. He was deeply involved in the design and construction of the Cahill Center for Astronomy, the creation of the Kavli Nanoscience Institute, and many other campus enterprises. He was one of the founders of the 30-meter telescope project. After Millikan and Bob Bacher, Tom was the longest-serving chairman of the division. His impact in that role was huge. It's best described by Mark Kamienkowski, one of the people he brought to Caltech. He said, and I'm quoting, "He was deeply devoted and extraordinarily effective PMA chair. He believed with every ounce of his being that Caltech was a special place and that its students and faculty were extraordinary, and that it was his mission to do whatever he could to help them out. With his Texas drawl and his frequent references, with a wink of an eye, to his Sicilian origins, he was one of a kind." That certainly describes the Tom that I knew. Tom took his greatest professional pride in his Physics 11 class, which he created and nurtured for a quarter of a century. For this, he was awarded the very first Richard P. Feynman Prize for Excellence in Teaching. This is the most cherished acknowledgement of excellence in teaching that Caltech offers. It is a profound statement that Tom was its first recipient. Tom had an enormous commitment to and impact on undergraduates and graduate students alike. The creation of the Thomas Tombrello Physics 11 Endowment and a graduate student prize in his name by his former students are reflections of the affection and appreciation with which he was held by those students. Tom was a special member of the Caltech community who had a huge impact on all of those whom he touched. We all miss him deeply. Stephanie will be the first speaker.
Thank you, Tom. My Tom, my focus, left us in the same manner as he lived. Headed efficiently for the objective he sought, he was happily involved with American Friends of Uppsala University, whose ring bore as firmly as the band I gave him, and headed for a board meeting determined to increase their resources. He had other plans for the fall. The final quarter of his Physics 11 class, during which these new sophomores would learn how to pick the next class of remarkable freshmen. Attending the Cancer RX conference in Boston, which in the event was dedicated to his memory in honor of his conceptualization of the idea. To the Hertz Foundation board meeting, a new endeavor based on his admiration for the quality of the scientists they support, and to Schlumberger, with whom he consulted for many years after he led their research laboratory. I've been told that despite the intense focus of the racing greyhound, a study in grace, the retired greyhound is a delightful domesticate, loving, enjoying the relaxation of home, warm and playful and caring. Tom didn't make fresh orange juice for me on holidays. No. Whether or not he had to climb the tree or was in a hurry for a trip, that treat was there every morning. Many of you know the Tom of his work, which seemed to have no bounds as he mentored many who were pursuing highly varied fields. How did he know the way forward in such diversity? At age 8, Tom figured out how people worked and what he could and could not reveal in the deep south of the United States. His was both the mind like a steel trap that took in, considered, and then remembered, but also the admirer of the diversity of others' ways, and the mind of the 9-year-old that wants to figure out everything interesting. He always respected women, saying his mother was the smartest person he'd known, if not the easiest. From his first unexpected telephone call, he had me laughing, decided we should date with our girls in tow, and on our third date, told me sweetly that he would marry me and take me to Australia on our honeymoon. I again laughed in surprise, as I said I was never marrying again. Within 6 months, I found myself in Australia with him and our 2 youngest, and always he kept me laughing. Tom wrote haiku and what he called doggerel, could recite poetry from his school days, spoke eloquently of the achievements of his colleagues and the great men and women he knew from his early days in physics, and was as happy to show up for the 20-year pin ceremony of a Caltech staff member as for a Nobel laureate. He knew how to value human beings. When I suggested he might write if he were to retire, he didn't wait, but started on both a novel and a book about managing the future. And he made me earrings from coins, fixed my jewelry when it faltered, and the night before he left for Sweden, made a necklace from a piece of Kauai coral he'd found for me. Despite the many duties of being chair of physics, math, and astronomy, Tom, to ease the life of a daughter, made up weekly meals and put them in her freezer. Tom read everything, from The Economist to new novels to John Grisham, history, economics, science of all stripes. And when he went to a museum, he always entered a room looking for the piece he would want to take home, making the looking more focused. He brought home jazz and opera, folk and symphonies, and knew how to make his partners look good on the dance floor. I miss Tom every day. There is a tremendous loss of his questing mind, which hunted down the meaning or played with the idea or shared his take on how to accomplish a challenge, but did so in a strongly caring context. I remember all too well how he supported all of us when we confronted the extraordinary loss of Shearston, and how it compelled him to seek answers so no one else need bear such pain. He looked forward to seeing how everyone would turn out, from students and grandchildren to friends and those he mentored. I trust all of us will turn out well in his honor. I would like to quote a poem. Grandfather, grandfather, so cunning, so wise. After we try and try with mechanical things, he helps with ease, mechanical smarts, and a very sure hand. Then kapow, kabang, with help that gleams, it is made. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Our next speakers are 2 recent Physics 11 students, Adam German and Jay Palakar.
So Adam and I thought that perhaps the best way to explain what it means to be a Phys 11 student would be to walk you all through just a single year and the 3 years that followed at Caltech. And so we were looking back on it, and I thought to myself, why did I do these hurdles? They're long and they're onerous. Quite crazy. And I realized that I'd spoken to a Physics 11 alumni when I was a freshman, and he said, being a Phys 11 student will be the highlight of your Caltech experience. And I'm only halfway through Caltech now, but I know that that's absolutely the truth. Professor Tombrello changed the way that every Phys 11 student thought. He took physics and kind of turned it on its head, and it was no longer a problem of, oh, here's an equation, and here are some things you know, and suddenly it was a toolkit to change the whole world. And that was how everything became. And he never really valued a mundane thought. He told us that if we're not being creative, we're probably not doing the problem right. And the way things went, I can remember one case where, for our class, he brought an article from a journal. And in this journal, it had said, oh, you can take a diffusion equation and model a crime. What do you kids think you can do with it? And I raised my hand, I said, Professor Tombrello, I think you can model real estate prices with this. And I explained my idea to him. And he said, that seems very interesting. I want you to go home and try to figure this out. But I think that there's going to be 3 problems you're going to encounter. So I went home, worked on it for a week, and came back and said, Professor Tombrello, I have 3 problems. And that was the way things worked. He knew what you're going to encounter, and he had a good sense of what you were going to do. But he always let you make the mistakes, and he let you learn things properly. And it wasn't even just the science that made Phys 11 special. After the science, there were these other things he just knew how to do. He made science human for a freshman at Caltech, basically a high school student. He told us all these stories, and every single time, every class, he would have a new story about someone new, and it would always be someone we'd heard of, and if we were lucky, maybe a little bit of gossip, a little bit of extra on the side. But it was always the kind of thing that made you feel like you were a member of the community. Suddenly you were part of this elite clique in this club, and this was the place where you could finally be something and achieve something, because he had that trust in us, and it was always just there. And I was thinking about just a single day of class, and I remembered every single class, he always asked us how we were doing before the class started. And most of the time we brushed this off, and I never really thought much about it back then, but I realized then that even for students, if we ever had trouble, he would talk to the deans, he would be sure that we were comfortable. Final exams and midterms, he would tell us, don't do work for Phys 11, do your schoolwork, you need to do well. And it was never about Phys 11. The world was not just about Phys 11 for him, it was about making sure that we were comfortable and happy and that we could achieve something. And so I was remembering back to the very last class of Phys 11, and I thought, well, this is the microcosm of my whole experience. I went to class, and we spent an hour doing problems, working on trying to find a bug because the behavior was strange. And I thought to myself, well, this is a pretty normal Phys 11 class, because after that, he started talking about the US Navy and post-war physics at Caltech and all the people he'd known. And then after that, he went on a nice 30-minute rant about how Caltech education should be about making Ferraris and how Caltech should be a Ferrari factory. And those were the 3 things that I always remembered about him: his mentorship, the science, and the way he could just tell a perfect story every time. Professor Tombrello, for me, was definitely the first person, even ahead of myself, who thought of me as a physics major and not thought of me as a physicist and not as a physics major. And that just came with so much compassion.
I'd like to echo that point. I think that one of the biggest things that I got out of talking with Professor Tombrello was that from day one, he treated me as a scientist. I was a high school student, basically, and he valued my ideas. He treated them as if they were worth considering and not just dismissing them out of hand. And that meant the world, because sort of coming into Caltech, you're overwhelmed. You feel like everything is big and you're small, and so it really made a huge difference. But beyond that, he was an advocate. I think that was one of his biggest roles. So even when we didn't believe in ourselves, even when his students didn't think that they could do something, he did. And so, I would walk into his office one day and he would say, you should apply for this fellowship. Or, I think that you should talk to Dario because he has something interesting to say. Or whatever it was, he thought that there were these incredibly interesting and maybe a bit risky things that we should be doing because he thought that we could do them. And I think that, just starting out in science, that's incredibly valuable and something that I'll always be thankful for. Because usually you're told, oh, don't do risky things, step out of line. Things will go poorly. But no, he said, you know what, you should try this. You should be different. You should investigate what you love and see what comes of it. And in the worst case, you did what you loved. And I think that was a tremendous thing. Beyond that, he opened doors. And what I mean by this is that he would, if there was something you wanted to do, he knew the person to talk to make it happen. So if you wanted to go work in Kazakhstan on some project involving a rare isotope that no one's ever heard of, well, he just happened to know the head of that lab. And he would shoot off an email, and you'd hear back in 30 minutes saying anything for a friend of Tom. And I think that building that sort of community was really what Physics 11 was all about. And I think that that's why he involved everyone from prior years so heavily in selecting the next years, because he felt that Physics 11 wasn't just sort of his project, it was something that belonged to the students who were in it. And so, I distinctly remember reading Jay's application to the course. And I remember in particular that Tom said, I'm not sure that this is right, but it sure is interesting. and we got a number like that where it looked a little funny and maybe we weren't sure that it made sense, but it was creative and it was risky and it was inspired, and that was really sort of what the community was and what I'm hoping the community will remain. And I guess personally, I owe Tom a tremendous amount. He advised me on everything from how to deal with administrators to how to pick a program to go with to what schools should I apply to or what schools shouldn't I apply to, and he once told me, I came into his office one day, he was my advisor, and I told him, I'm going to apply for an overload, can I have your signature? And he said, you can have my signature, I just want you to know that this is a terrible idea, you're going to be miserable, but I'm going to let you do it. And sure enough, it was a terrible idea, I was miserable, and I think that he realized that I wouldn't have learned that lesson if he didn't let me try it and see for myself. And so I think I owe him a great deal, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity.
Okay, our next speakers are going to be two Physics 11 alumni, Thomas Fink and Milo Lin.
I got to know Tom as an undergraduate in the 90s, and the two of us kept in touch ever since. In fact, more recently, we even had a chance to work together. Now, I want to tell you two personal stories about Tom. Both of them are short stories, but they both had a big impact in who I am today. My first story is about inspiration. During my senior year at Caltech, I took the option of doing a senior thesis. It was about neutron stars. The oral exam involved a short talk and then questions, and Tom was one of the 5 professors on the examining board. Now, I'm sure everybody gets nervous about giving talks some of the time. Well, back then, I really hated giving talks all of the time. So I prepared a lot and gave my talk, and when it came time to questions, I got really stumped. One of the questions really stumped me. So my mouth started talking before my brain figured out what it was trying to say, and I got so nervous, I actually passed out. I fainted. Well, a few minutes later, I came to, and I sheepishly carried on answering questions. When it was all done, I was really upset. I felt I had let myself down, but even more, I was sure I had let Tom down. He had put so much faith in me. How could I fluff an oral final? Afterwards, Tom never mentioned it. I tried not to think about it, but inside, I was sure Tom thought he had backed the wrong horse. 2 months later, Tom asked me to come into his office. "Thomas," he said, "the research director's conference is coming up, and I'd like you to be the after-dinner speaker." At the Athenaeum, to 150 people. Well, you can imagine my reaction. What is he thinking? I pass out, and now he wants me to be on stage in the limelight where I can really do some damage. I was so determined to make that talk a success. I threw myself into it. I practiced to friends, and I practiced to Tom. And when the time came, I pulled it off. Tom, I'm sure, was relieved. I was thrilled. Not only did I redeem myself, I discovered I really was capable of something I didn't think was within me. There's a film called Invictus about Nelson Mandela and the South African rugby team. When Mandela meets the team captain, he asks him, "How do you inspire your team to do their best?" "By example. I've always thought to lead by example, sir." "Well, that is right," Mandela says. "But how do we get them to be better than they think they can be?" "That is very difficult, I find. We have to inspire others to greatness beyond their own belief." And that is what Tom did. He inspired others to greatness they didn't know that was in them, to be better than they thought they could be. Tom did this to me, and he's done it to a lot of you here today. My second story is about creating an amazing environment for research. Physics 11 was my first experience of how much fun research could be. But over the next 10 years, as my physics career progressed, a strange thing happened. I thought I was going to do more and more research, but what I found is I ended up doing less and less. How did this happen? Those summers at Caltech were carefree months of uninterrupted tinkering. Then I went on to do my PhD. This was almost as good, but I had to spend time marking students' work. Well, by the time I got to be an associate professor, doing research had become a minority activity. Most of my time was spent on committees and marking papers and bureaucracy. And this didn't make any sense to me. The thing I was good at, and the thing that I loved, was making discoveries. But every time my career advanced, I got rewarded with more of the stuff I didn't like. When I look back and thought of my happiest research experiences, they were the ones that were freest and most unencumbered. Physics 11 at Caltech, my junior fellowship at Cambridge, working on DARPA projects on near impossible missions. But those times were few and far between. My job was getting a lot more serious and a lot less fun. I asked myself, does it really have to be this way? Could there be a different kind of institute, one where the focus is on doing research and nothing else? A sort of physics and math institute of advanced study. And that's what I set out to build. Now, if that doesn't already sound crazy, let me tell you this. We didn't have any money. We didn't have an endowment. We didn't have any rich partners. One of the first persons I turned to was Tom, because I knew he wouldn't shoot down the idea without a fair hearing. Well, not only was he enthusiastic, Tom was the second person to join our board of trustees. That crazy idea was 5 years ago, and Tom helped guide us every step of the way. Today, the London Institute has a 5-floor building in Mayfair with 6 fellows and 10 postdocs. And one of the first things we did, we set up a Physics 11 program for bright visiting undergraduates, and Tom sent us one from Caltech every year. Building the London Institute has been the hardest thing I've ever done. I had to believe from the outside that we could achieve the impossible. I had to learn to inspire our faculty to be better than they thought they could be. I've had to learn how to be a better leader. All of these things along the way, I've learned from many people. Most of all, I picked them up from Tom. Thank you.
Tom really built a research family, and when I say family, I mean it in all the best ways that that term is used. And he built a network that was, I think someone mentioned Sicilian. It was such a close-knit network because Tom really sought out people who he saw a spark in, and he put everything behind them, no matter what the seeming evidence was at the beginning. For me, and for many other Phys 11 students, this was critical because we entered Physics 11 as freshmen. We had a lot of time to learn and develop and figure out what we wanted to do. And Tom said that it was so important that we had a time to fail now, that we can work on projects and explore areas we thought we wanted to do and find out we didn't want to do them at all because we had the luxury as undergraduates to really fail and understand from the failure where we could really succeed and where we could be happy. In my own story, I started out thinking I was going to do probably something like the hottest things in string theory that were happening at the time because that's where all the hot shots were doing in physics. And I explored that option, and I did some projects in Phys 11, and the summer after I went off to Livermore, and it was a quantum computational group that I joined for the summer program. And when I came back, I told Tom some of the things I was doing, and he listened to all the technique parts, of course, but what he picked up on was every time I spoke about the aspects of the project that had to do with something that was only tangentially related, namely the biology and the biological complexity, he saw that spark in me. And after I finished discussing what I learned and what I thought I had taken from this trip, he said, "This is all great, Milo. I know somebody, just a few years ago, he won a very big prize. And usually when someone wins this prize, they will sit back and rest on their laurels because they have basically achieved the ultimate in science. But this man is different. He's won the prize, and he's going to go on to do something even more awesome. He's setting up new experimental methodologies to look at both the spatial and the temporal, with spatial and temporal resolution, the dynamics of biological molecules. I like what you said, but go talk to Ahmed Zewail." So I did. And I did so in a spirit of adventure in science that drew me to science in the first place. And I was able to find a place, like many other Phys 11 students, to nourish that sense of science as an adventure, to have practice and to fail and to go through this process before we entered the realm of science that is practiced today. And having this playground to be able to explore and to find out what we really wanted to do, and to go after what was in our hearts and not what we thought was the top objective of what was the hottest thing in our field. That was one of the greatest gifts. Following that conversation with Tom, that set the trajectory for my career. That set the trajectory for what I did in my PhD, not just for my undergrad. I did my PhD with Ahmed Zewail. And that conversation was the beginning of a decades-long interaction and collaboration with someone that I didn't even know about what they were doing as a freshman. So Tom really sets the trajectories of many people's lives, both in their careers as well as in their social lives. And I'm just amazed as I learn more and more about the other people, that he's touched. I feel like standing here today and in the process of learning more about Tom in the last few years, a concept that I learned when I went into biology is a concept that in an ecosystem, there are often what's called keystone species. These are species that bring the whole network together. These are the species that the whole ecosystem feels. And Tom, for many, many different networks, was a keystone species. And I'm only speaking now of the Physics 11 network. What we did prior to this memorial was we sent out emails to all of the Physics 11 alumni to ask them, whom did Tom connect you to? And from that data, we built an infographic, which you can see in the back there, of all the Physics 11 students who's responded so far. And just from this one network, just from this Physics 11 network, you can see the power of Tom as a connector, as a hub. How he selflessly connected people together because he thought that there was mutual interest and because he thought there was a possibility of a scientific adventure. And if you look at the data there, I think Tom would get a kick out of looking at this network. What you see is that not only are there connections among people who are close together in the same year, what you would expect if people were taking a class from someone, they were interacting and the professor was putting them together with their peers. But what you see is much larger connections across time scales. You see the graph making connections across decades. Because Tom would say, hey, this is what you're doing. I know a guy, or I know a girl. And he would put you together with people you would have thought of. So please take a look at this infographic. And by the way, the majority of the work that went into this beautiful graphic was that of Jacob Schenker, who's also with us. Jacob is another Phys 11 alum. And we're really excited that this spirit of adventure and family is going to continue on in the future at Caltech. So to close, I want to read, I think as always, Tom said it best in his own words. So I want to read just an excerpt from the Caltech oral histories. And when you listen to this, imagine Tom saying this with a smirk on his face, like he always does. He said, and it's just great fun. You never know what you're going to find in the email or when you pick up the phone who it's going to be. It's a marvelous experience. It's totally seductive. And sometimes it's years afterward. You don't remember me? Of course I remember you. Doing anything? What are you doing? Oh, it's quite a remarkable thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tom's brother-in-law, Robert Merton.
Wonderful remarks. Tough act to follow. A few words to begin with. I have two wonderful sisters who are both here, but I have no brother. Tom filled that void for me. He always was available for my inquiries, for my questions. He had some good advice, wise advice, and that's hard to find these days. And he even went and worked out the mathematics of my own work in finance. I don't know why, but he did it. So he'll always occupy a very special place for me. But today, I want to celebrate with so many others his remarkable contributions to a wide array of important activities interesting activities, influencing institutions, projects, of course, science itself, and very importantly, individuals, of which we've heard individual cases already, and I'm sure we'll hear more before we're done. As we've heard this, you think of the remarkable range. I was trying to make a list and I gave up, so I just have a couple of what I think of as outliers. He said, all the science and so forth. He was a scientific advisor to what we hope will be a successful Broadway musical on Nikola Tesla. He was a role model, a character, for several of the characters or components of them in the hit show Numbers, the scientific detective stories. And then, at the other extreme, he played a critical role in a crazy idea to use financial engineering to help cure cancer. And that's my few minutes I thought I would talk about. The story begins on the other coast at the other institute in the Sloan School of Management, in our finance unit, our financial engineering unit. One of my colleagues took the lead, Andrew Lowe, who I think spoke here earlier this week, in fact. Along with us, it came up with the idea that there was some disconnect. We're hearing about it. You're surrounded at MIT not only with scientists, but as you know, we have this enormous pharma biotech complex, probably the largest in research anywhere, and it's incredible, surrounding us. So all this wonderful science we heard about, whether it was at Broad or Whitehead or whatever. And yet, when we looked at the data, what did we see? The amount of investment going into it was relatively modest compared to investment going into all kinds of other things. The number of successes, at least measured in terms of FDA approvals, were going down. So what was the disconnect? Great ideas, and yet the data were going the other way. And the idea was maybe there's a logjam out there that's causing this disconnect. And of course, you go to a surgeon, they're going to think of surgery. You go to finance people, they're going to think of finance. So the idea is maybe it was the finance which was the logjam. Somehow our institutions are not framed correctly to be able to generate the connections, the resources, and the putting together of these great ideas and turning them into great realizations. And a characterization of Tom, to stop for a moment in my story, that I've always struck, and you heard how he was always curious about everything and saying, the excitement of discovery and adventure and all in science, and that was certainly Tom. But the other part of Tom, which I greatly admired, was that he believed science was there to do more than just amuse us or satisfy our curiosity, but to matter, to help society. And he was very embedded in implementation and development, making it actually happen. And I had the great good fortune to see that on a number of occasions. And this story that I've taken this detour with is one such example. So I talked to Tom about this idea my colleague had. And you think about it, it's enormous because the scale of this, we're talking about billions and billions, and how would you bring the diverse group of people together to make it work? You just didn't need oncologists or scientists, you needed venture capitalists, you needed pension funds, you needed NIH, American Cancer, you needed a whole host of people, many with substantial egos, and not all kind of looking at the world in the same way. And how would you ever bring them together to actually do something of this scale? The idea was to build what we call the mega fund. And I'm not going to go into all of that, but it was a big project, an exciting project, and one that, frankly, I didn't think had much chance, not because of its merits, but because of execution. Tom vetted it very carefully. He was not one to waste time, not even for his brother-in-law. Okay? And he decided, while it was risky, it was real, and it was worth it. And he got in touch with a former student co-organizer of a cancer conference, and my colleague was invited to Cold Spring Harbor to talk to some oncologists and some scientists, and yes, they brought a few VCs, one economist, my colleague, and he got the opportunity to lay out his idea. And from that, he got the kind of positive reinforcement that, hey, they didn't think he was crazy, and yes, the problem was big enough that even if it was crazy, it was worth listening to. And from there, we set up the idea of what was come to call Cancer X, like RX at the end of cancer. And the goal was precisely to find a way to help cure cancer by finding the resources and generating them to the right places, using financial engineering for good. And the first such conference, Tom served on the steering committee, and of course, you've heard, he knows everyone. You know the old Mo Kratz joke, okay? He knew everyone, and when he made a call, they listened. And they came. In fact, as it started to go, so many came, we couldn't let everybody come who was going to come. And next thing you know, Nature wanted to be there, the whole crowd, all, you know, certainly, if it wasn't for Tom, it would have been a very tough one to get a bunch of people like that there. And believe it or not, it was a success. It was held at MIT. A bunch of people of all these different types came, and out of that, a bunch of people took it seriously and said, let's take it further. And there were additional conferences. We had Cancer RX 2014. Tom was on the steering committee. He was leading that, helping that. Unfortunately, he wasn't here for it, but the effects of what he'd done are there. And what I really want to say out of this is that we don't know whether would have gotten it done without Tom. That experiment we can't run. But I surely didn't want to take the risk of trying to do it that way. So as I believe this will be, if Cancer RX turns out to be a success in really addressing not only cancer, of course, but the same principles can be applied to orphan diseases on a different scale, or on a much larger scale, Alzheimer's. But the whole principles put forward there, should this, as I believe it will be a success, it will be one of the many legacies that Tom contributed to. And it exemplifies what I've heard over and over again as I knew him and as I hear about him now, that he did all of this and had all this influence and remained, I think, purposely invisible. His name was never put up in the lights as he is the leader of this, or he was taking charge of whether it was Cancer X or all these different things. But nevertheless, he was critical to the success of each of these. And I believe that really is a trait. And I hope that we all remember that and perhaps honor it and perhaps try to live up to that occasionally. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tom's first PhD student, Andy Bacher.
It's a delight to be here, sad moment as it is. I first met Tom in the fall of 1961 when he came to Caltech as a fresh PhD from Rice, working as an experimentalist with Jerry Phillips and as a theorist with to Bachman and Ian Duck. After 2 years, he went to Yale, working with Alan Bromley. A year later, the prodigal son, as he mailed a quote to Willie Fowler, was back at Caltech, first as a research scientist, and then in 1965 he was named an assistant professor of physics. We immediately started working together again. It was a great thrill and also a great challenge working with Tom during those early years. He was both a very good experimentalist and a great theorist. What a combination. We spent a great many morning coffee breaks and late experimental runs on the tandem accelerator, plotting new directions together. That was fun. In fact, in 1964, we showed that the sun fuses hydrogen to helium using the helium-3 plus helium-3 reaction, going to a alpha particle plus 2 protons. That was not what was expected by Hans Bethe, who had predicted that it would be CNO cycle, although he suggested the PP chain later. It's very important to understand that the Kellogg lab was very much like a family, a home away from home for many of us. So it was very close to us, and we would defend it to the death if conditions warranted that. I know that Tom felt the same way about Kellogg and also about Caltech, especially. Tom loved to travel. In 1967, when he received an invitation from the Japanese to describe this new tandem lab we were using at a conference on low-energy accelerator physics and low-energy accelerators in nuclear physics, Tom signed up for a course in Japanese at the Pasadena City College. He not only learned to speak Japanese, he learned some of the kanji characters and developed a taste and appreciation for the traditional haiku poetry, which he quoted in his paper. In the 1980s, he liked to spend a month getting out from under the administrative details that no doubt here. First at Los Alamos, and then a little bit later at Livermore. At Los Alamos, he worked in the accelerator division with Ed Knapp on the design of linear accelerators, and he created, in his mathematical abilities, the theory of the operation of these accelerators very early on. He also met Bo Høisted, a Swedish postdoc at Los Alamos, and who eventually convinced his boss back in Uppsala to enlist Tom to help the ice ring being assembled there from a ring at CERN. So that was, the Uppsala connection eventually growing out of this work at Los Alamos. In the 1990s, at Livermore, Tom worked on a committee with Ed Moses, who was constructing the National Ignition Facility there. And that was also an exciting time. And I actually use that facility myself now in my research. You might find it surprising, I know I did, to find out that Tom's mild disposition encouraged a few enemies. He was called a great many names. One you might guess from the initials of sweetheart, intense, and terrible temper. Anyway. Don't want to embarrass you too much. Tom could travel in the summer when he wasn't being an administrator and inventing and developed the Physics 11 course that you've heard about from earlier speakers. A course that Tom was also department chair from 1998 to 2008. And these were very formative years for the new directions of the department and Caltech. There's an ugly new building across the street. But Caltech also took a principal role in one of the new giant telescope projects. So I'd like to finish by talking a little bit about Judith Goodstein's book, Millikan School. If you haven't read it, it's a delightful scholarly account of the backgrounds at Caltech. She identifies two eras. The first was, of course, Robert Millikan and Thomas Hunt Morgan, who he brought here to lead the Institute in the directions of biology. Then there was Lee DeBridge and Robert Bacher. So 20 or 30 years from now, maybe we'll need to include the Tombrello era. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speakers were two of Tom's co-conspirators on at the beginnings of TMT. Richard Ellis, who's a professor of astronomy here, and Cindy Atherton, who at the time was at the Moore Foundation.
So Tom was division chair when I came to Caltech in 1999 from Cambridge University. And a key activity at that time was developing the science and technical case for the 30-meter telescope, which is a giant telescope now ready for construction on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. TMT is without question the most ambitious scientific program that Caltech has ever undertaken. And Tom not only initiated this project, but he also inspired many of us here in this room to work on it for the next 16 years. So the beginning of TMT is a fascinating story that you can read about in the Caltech archives in Tom's oral history that was so nicely put together by Heidi Aspatorian. In late 1998, at an anniversary at Owens Valley, Steve Koonin, the provost at the time, characteristically asked Tom a question. The twin Keck telescopes had only just been completed. And Steve asked Tom, when are you going to produce a proposal for the next big telescope? Tom said, later this afternoon. Now, in July 1999, when Tom had successfully convinced me to move to Caltech, but I was still in Cambridge, he phoned me up and he invited me all the way to Hawaii. And with the late Wells Sargent, Tom and I met our counterparts from the University of California, Jerry Nelson, the project scientist for the Keck telescopes, who became the project scientist for TMT, Joe Miller, Wells Sargent's counterpart, director of the UC observatories, and Judd King. And at that meeting, in a little room in the Keck headquarters in Hawaii, the California Extremely Large Telescope, CELT, was born. Steve vectored $1 million that he had received from Gordon Moore towards Tom and said, get on with a conceptual study. And later, Tom was instrumental in inspiring Gordon Moore, as we'll hear from Cindy, particularly by arranging to have a trustees meeting in Hawaii that really inspired Gordon personally. So this was an amazingly exciting time to be at Caltech. I just arrived, and frankly, I'd never seen anything like it in Britain or in Europe. Tom exuded enthusiasm and prodded us all on a daily basis to move forward, not just on the science case, but the technical study as well, for which he had a remarkable passion. Now, inspiration from Tom covers the full spectrum from personal support to brusque emails. A characteristic Tombrello remark at the time was, "Richard, why haven't you made more progress? I'm not running a retirement home." Now, there were early tensions in the project. The University of California, perhaps understandably, thought that they could do this alone, technically. Caltech would be useful in providing some money, but frankly, technically, Jerry Nelson and his gang knew how to make a big telescope. Tom fiercely defended Caltech's role in TMT, and with amazing vision, he saw it as an opportunity to strengthen us technically. And actually, he inspired many engineers to move to campus, both from JPL and elsewhere, to work on TMT. And many of those engineers are here now, today. Now, in 2004, the partnership was expanded to include Canada, and later Japan, China, and India, and CALT became TMT, the 30-meter telescope. We hired a remarkable project manager, Gary Sanders. Tom was involved centrally in that decision, and Gary Sanders is still the project manager of TMT. So Tom knew Gary from the LIGO days, and I remember a conversation with Tom about working with Gary. And Tom said, "Well, I've worked with a lot of project managers. At the outset, it's a bit like training a dog. The first thing you need to do is to establish who is the dog." So Tom became a hugely powerful figure on TMT. He was on the board of directors. For these formative years through the design study, which continued right through Tom's chairmanship of the division. I have a quote from another board member, Ray Karlberg in Canada. "Tom's lateral thinking was both entertaining and insightful, whether it was full bore in your face or whispered conspiratorially in one's ear during the board meeting." So even after Tom finished his division chair and left the TMT board, he remained a constant supporter of TMT, and as we'll hear, a regular contact point with Gordon Moore and the Moore Foundation. I would meet Tom regularly in the gym. He was there pretty well every day. So there we were, showering naked together, and he would come right up to me and say, "How's TMT?" So Tom embodied the spirit of Caltech for over a decade on TMT. He played a huge role in initiating the project. He was an enormous figure in my own career, and I'm proud to have worked with him on this excellent project.
So as Richard said, I was kind of the Moore counterpart for these last few years of the TMT, but I actually go way further back to a Physics 2 class and a very frightened sophomore sitting high up in the eaves hoping that she would pass it with at least a B or better. So my hat is off to all you Phys 11 students. I would be the one that fainted. And I wanted to start by saying I thought about the cons and the pros of Tom Tombrello as I was putting my words together, and I'd like to share them with you, but I hope you'll know, Stephanie, that the cons are all good. If you think about Tom Tombrello, these are the words that come to mind: connector, conspirator, conversationalist, concerned, contemplative, contrary, I'm just saying, Sicilian, Bible Belt, it happens. And one that I hope you'll let me sneak in at the end, counselor. So I added a vowel, but Vanna let me buy it. On the pros, the words that come to mind are a prober, He would ask a lot of questions. He would ask them of you personally. He would ask them of you in front of a directorate review committee at Lawrence Livermore Lab. He was a proponent, especially of Caltech. He loved this place. He loved this place for 50 years. Prolific, as in the Phys 11 diagram. Propellant, proactive. I swear to God, that man was 8 chess moves ahead of anybody in the room, every time. Productive, provocative, and profound. And when I think about the conspiracy or conspiring aspect of him, I also have the stories about the early days of TMT also. And you can imagine, and I saw him do it in the photos, well, Steve, I think we'll start on it this afternoon. Tom taught me a lesson about communications that I didn't learn until really my 5th decade of life. When you want to give a message, you need to understand who your audience is, what your message is, and to what action. And when I started on the TMT, Tom said, Cindy, I have a story for you, with the finger point. And he said, there was this time where we really wanted to start on this telescope project. And there was one particular person I wanted to know about this telescope project. His name, of course, was Gordon Moore. So yes, I arranged to have a Board of Trustees meeting in the Big Island of Hawaii, right? And I sold it to Baltimore by telling him we've got the Caltech submillimeter observatory, we've got the twin Kecs. But what I wanted to do was get Gordon Moore on top of the mountain, and I did. And out of that first came, beyond Steve's $1 million kind of seed fund, there were equal grants of $17.5 million each to UC and Caltech. And we recently, at the groundbreaking, the sort of groundbreaking ceremony for TMT, we reflected back that when Moore Foundation made that commitment early on, there was nothing, not even really a design. There was Jerry Nelson's proof that the Keck telescopes and segmented mirror telescopes would work, and there were a lot of sharp people that we could draw on, but it was kind of a leap of faith to put that big money into that project. I have my fact checker here probably, but Steve, I understand there were trips with you and Tom coming up to the Presidio at some point. So you were pressing from the outside. Simultaneously, Gordon Moore's son, Ken, was, as he called it, eroding from the inside, Dad's determination to finally succeed to this. Gordon Moore has said that every scientist's second avocation is astronomy, and every one of us wants to be a closet astronomer. And he subscribed to whatever astronomy magazines you people subscribe to, he still gets and reads. And I think Ken knew this would be sort of the hallmark of the Moore legacy. We are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Moore's Law next month at the Exploratorium, but the family really viewed this as a way for Gordon Moore to give back to all of humanity. And so I think there was that connection there of, he's watching me, isn't he? I'm doing good by you, buddy, trust me. There was the connection of Tom that he made between Gordon and the mountain. There was a connection of the scientists, the UC, Caltech, each one thinking that maybe they could do it by themselves. I think at that trustee meeting, he purposely had Jerry Nelson and Ed Stone. Ed, am I right? I see my other fact checker in the back. And those were really the best of both of us, right? And have continued to this day to be integral parts of the 30-meter telescope project. As I said, the proponent of Caltech, the propellant to launch this forward, and the prober of questions. So once he stepped down as chair of PMA, I still, every time I came to this campus, met with him informally. I called it the boots on the ground, real story of what was going on. And I had the privilege of overseeing this very large commitment of $300 million that the Moore Foundation had made to Caltech, as well as $250 million they had made to the telescope project. So we would meet in all kinds of places. I can't tell you how many lunches at the Ath, how many dinners at the Ath, how many glasses of wine in Hayman Lounge, how many times I trotted up those stairs to the Sloan Annex. Times even when you came up to visit the twins, and I would take him away for a little bit of reality and humor. And I really felt like he had the pulse of what made a scientist tick here, how things were really going, and how I would leave my thoughts with you is you knew him as this invisible hand. You knew him as someone who really promoted so many people and so many scientists and connected him. And there was yet another aspect to his personality that I probably drew on more than any of you, and so, probably there was nothing left for the rest of you, but he was a counselor. And my counseling sessions took place in all those places I told you, and we talked about the psychology and sociology of board governance. We talked about brilliant acts by a board or an individual. And imagine this, we talked about acts of incredible stupidity by a board or individual. Stop me if you've ever heard this song. We talked about Thule fog and depression in young female college students. We talked about how to handle a coworker with a substance abuse problem. We talked about who he had nominated for a Nobel Prize and why. We talked about the joy and lack of sleep associated with a new puppy. We talked about the merits of the Department of Energy's research program. There came a time when I was told to go home and find out who Red Barber was and what it meant to sit in the catbird seat and how that meant I should conduct myself in my job. We talked about unappreciated classical composers. We talked about fracking and induced seismicity before it was popular and in the press. We talked about Caltech and sports cars and whether we should do that or just have really good Lexus capabilities. And we talked about life. And I would like to think now, though I know TMT is in a bump right now, and I will assure you, the last place I came to before I came here was the TMT project office. You're going to make it. There's a bump now. But I would like to think that of all the things Tom Tombrello was when he was here, imagine him now if the atoms of his soul are not bound by flesh and his thoughts are not constrained in space and time, how he will be adding to this project even still, and how proud he will be of you when we see first light. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speakers are two of Tom's friends from the Grove, Jasper Ryan and Jim O'Donnell.
Thank you. Stephanie, family and friends of Tom Tombrello. It's a very sad reason to get us together for a very special memory. Tom Tombrello touched many, including friends at the Bohemian Club. When Tom was around our campfire, it was transformed to the couches outside his office. We all became Phys 11 students. He was generous with his criticism, his compliment, his stimulation. He was the nucleus for our wide-ranging conversation. Physics became as mainstream as music and football. Joy and fellowship followed. He brought us together. Now, being at this special place, I feel compelled to comment on the excellence of this university and this community. There is dangerous debate about economizing higher education by emphasizing online learning and teaching by non-research faculty. We need professors like Tom Tombrello, who in Phys 11 spawned the type of graduates we heard from earlier. It will be very difficult to replace, but I've met some of your young professors. They share Tom's knowledge and communication skills. I think students in research here have a bright future. People like Tom contributed greatly to that future. Caltech and everyone here owes Tom a pledge to continue search for excellence. Thank you.
The Bohemian Grove is an utterly beautiful redwood forest on the south side of the Russian River near Monterey in California. And in the Grove, there are about 100 camps with maybe 10 to 30 people in each of the camps. Each camp has its own personality, and Tom belonged to the camp Sons of Toil, and I would say about half of the members of Sons of Toil are here to share this day with us today. Now, the Grove has a few odd rules. No cameras at all. That's why there are no pictures of Tom at the Grove. But this amazing portrait came from our camp member, Del Aldid, and I think it's one of the most beautiful portraits I've ever seen. Now, I want to use words instead of a camera to paint 3 sketches of Tom in the Grove. Scene 1, an evening around the campfire. We're rehydrating after a day of vigorous frivolity and warding off scurvy and malaria with a gin and tonic. And as the conversation proceeds, Tom lobs a seemingly innocent question into the conversation. Now, many members of our camp are wise enough to know that no question from Tom is innocent, but the occasional newcomer will take the bait. And I was halfway through the answer when I looked up and saw Tom looking over the top of his glasses with that smile going from ear to ear as I realized I had no idea what I was talking about and that I had just been Tombrelloed. Scene 2, last summer. While walking to breakfast one day in the dining circle where we all eat together, Tom says, "We need a camp song." Now, no other camp has ever needed a camp song or ever had a camp song, but Tom decided that we needed one. So he wrote one that day, and that afternoon, imagine this, Tom, the choir master, is rehearsing us in this song, right? And we then proceeded to sing it publicly whenever we walked to the dining circle by a group who was largely not known for its vocal harmony. No other camp has a camp song. Sure, Highlanders has those kilts and that awful bagpipe, but they don't have a song like Tom's. Scene 3 requires understanding another rule of the Grove. No electronic communication of any type. So, on most mornings, around about 11 o'clock, Tom takes a walk. So he's got his broad-brimmed hat on, and he walks out of the camp nonchalantly, perhaps a little too nonchalantly, walks down the road and walks out of the Grove with a suspicious valise under his arm. What's this all about? That's Tom sneaking off into Monterey to find a wireless connection because he spent the previous night reviewing papers from his students or writing letters of recommendation for all the more of them. So that's Tom. Tom loved his students and poured his heart and soul into his teaching. He's told us many stories about many of you. You're sort of, in our minds, sort of like characters from Lake Wobegon. Especially the above average part. Okay. Now, Tom taught our camp many things, but the one thing I wish he'd taught us better was how to tell him how much we loved him while he was still here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Caltech Distinguished Alumna and radio star, Sandra Singlo.
Well, it's great to be here on this admittedly sad yet festive occasion as we celebrate Tom's life. I think you can look around at people in this room and know you are all good people because Tom Tombrello did not suffer fools. So you can look around and trust everybody here. He has not said nary a bad word about you, but anybody not in this room, probably so. I think of Tom as my Caltech dad, for sure. And I think to think of him as your Caltech dad, you have to know what it is to be part of the Caltech family. And I began my journey in the Caltech family as one of its misshapen undergraduates way back in '79. You know, Phys 11, I applaud you. Cindy, Phys 2, amazing. I never made it really past Phys 1 with Steve Koonin, barely survived. It's a dreamlike memory of having been at Caltech, given that I didn't go on in science. You know, my grades were glued together with partial credit, as I like to say. And I first met Tom Tombrello. I didn't even study with him, but at my senior thesis, when I was defending my senior thesis somewhere in the bowels of Lauritsen, and it was about sputtering and some ions that were pretty heavy. That's all I remember. I've blocked it out of my mind. I mean, I do host a science show today and I master that science, but I think defending your thesis at Caltech in physics is a dreamlike experience, but Tom was there. So, and he passed me, thank goodness. And I graduated from Caltech in '83, and I think the experience, again, of going to Caltech is to feel like you weren't worthy. You were the only person on campus that really didn't know what was going on. And you are the faker. It's like, don't let the door hit you on the butt on the way out of Caltech. And I went on, in fact, to have one of the strangest post-Caltech careers, I think, on record. Is kind of like, I was a performance artist. I played piano in the Harbor Rush Hour. I was, stampeded by a crowd collecting money that rained over me as I played the piano. I serenaded grunions at midnight with a 35-piece symphony orchestra. I really had no idea what I was doing. But the whole time he loved the misfits of Caltech. You know, go and date a rock bagpipe player in Canada, that's great. I mean, go helicoptering over. He really, and even like to the end of his life, he was always so tickled at undergraduates that were doing kind of wacky things and having an irregular career, so to speak. And so what happened is over the years he kept supporting me, and I actually started getting a career and making some money at some of the things I was doing. So, and I think it almost tickled Tom because he was in the back room where, imagine my surprise, where it's kind of like, you've been nominated as a distinguished alumna of Caltech. And my whole family fell off their chairs laughing. I was like, are you kidding? They really got nuts now. And then a few years later, you want to give the commencement speech at Caltech? It's like, no way. And my dad said, that is not possible. Don't even go. You've given me a heart attack. That can't be possible. And it was always Tom that was behind this because I think that he loved to sort of change things up, make things quirky and just keep stirring the pot over and over. And I think that's one of, why he's the heart and soul of Caltech. There's a maverick quality about Caltech and about him that lives to this day. But I think, my sort of main, the anecdote that I'd like to share from today is very much a midlife anecdote where, one goes off into the world away from Caltech, you're astray, but Caltech forgives you, and then they push you away, and then they forgive you. We always had that relationship with this fine institution. So it came a couple of years ago where midlife, I have a situation where Caltech has funded a project for a while, and now they're no longer going to fund it. Time for lunch with Tom. And if you understand Tom, as I only would understand later, I didn't understand this at the moment. All I knew him as a friendly professor that was always kind of cranky and funny and that you could reach out to on a range of issues. But, when Cindy, you said that Tom loved Caltech, and he did love Caltech. And did he love Caltech politics? He kind of loved it. It was kind of his Kentucky Derby, racetrack thing. Caltech politics were both, Tom's ire and his joy. He's up there in heaven right now on the back of a napkin making new organizational maps for Caltech. He's that sort of, he sort of loved it. It was his fun. And I think, again, that is part of, for me, that's really the Caltech spirit and the Caltech character, is that I've gone, now that I've had the experience of going to Caltech distinguished alumni luncheons at the president's house, I get to chat with some of the distinguished alumni, and even to the last man, and sometimes woman, you'll have like an 85-year-old guy who's won 3 Nobel Prizes and headed many multi-billion-dollar corporations, and he'll even be saying, I don't know, Caltech, something they did to me in my senior year, I'm not sure. I barely got on the plane today to come here, I'm so mad. And I think that's part of, that's the wonder of scientists. I mean, we're not politicians, we're not good at that. We're like scientists and thinkers and arguers and, contrarians. I mean, that was like the essence of Tom, and that's why, that's one of the reasons, many reasons I love him. But so I sit there at lunch and I go, but I don't know how to get money in the middle of life. And so I sent him an email inviting him to lunch at the Ath, not knowing that since I'm not a member, I'm inviting him to buy me lunch. Okay, whoops. Okay, so it's kind of as I arrive kind of anxiously. It's like my first time back in the dining room. It's like I'm sweating. It's kind of like, am I waiting on the tables or am I eating lunch? I don't know. I'm from Page House. It was a mess there. It's anyway, and so I sit down, and so I awkwardly say, and we start small talking, and he's funny as usual. I say, well, I'm looking for money for this project. It's like the Lowdown on Science, the radio show that I host that Caltech had funded for many years, and he goes, oh, well, and I go, well, should I talk to this person or that person? And so what Tom does, he's like, it's been said he's like the Sicilian uncle, and so in a way Caltech is like the Vatican, and he knows where everything's buried, right? It's kind of like the capo is in the corner at his table going, oh, and you go, well, here's the guy with important sounding title who's in everything, and he'd go, he's an idiot. And I think Tombrello has names for idiots that are so colorful, and it's kind of and the stories of people's stupidity, it's almost he could put it to music, probably at the Bohemian, play banjo and sing the songs. Like, he loves that most, I think, and he loves us, but complaining about stupid people he loved almost more. So he goes, oh, you go to that person, and in organizational chart, everybody's here, and in companies and on boards, it's kind of like sometimes the guy or the lady whose, title is head of giving money to every good project, if you would just simply ask because you're smart people, and he goes, oh, if you talk to him, he's the guy that will give you the top 10 list of people not to go to, so don't go, he'll shut you down. And so as he's talking, I'm getting more and more gloomy, because I go, here's my favorite uncle from Caltech. He's pretty irascible. I think he's mad at everyone on campus. Everyone on campus is mad at him. He just sets up an office in the middle of campus because he can, and I don't really know what's going on, and maybe he's going a bit off, I don't know. And he said, so you can't talk to any of the 20 people we just talked about. He goes, that's not the way I got my $100 billion zillion for the telescope on the hill. And I go, what? Maybe I better sit and listen more closely. And he was, Sandra, the fingers like that. To get money in this world, you gotta have friends. I have a friend named Gordon Moore. Gordon Moore is Intel number 3. And so he went on so I was obviously not a friend of Gordon Moore, but he went in more close. He goes, Sandra, you graduated in '83, you were on the volleyball team, and you had that great thesis on sputtering. It's like, what? He remembered my thesis, which I blocked out of my mind. He said, and heavy ions and whatever. And he goes, but, Cindy Atherton was in Ruddock the same year as you were in '83. Cindy Atherton is right here. He goes, you're of the same tribe. You are the same year. You should call, she runs everything. She's like the Barbara Stanwyck. Didn't he say you were like Barbara Stanwyck? Yeah, I forget what he was telling me. I was like, I've blocked that out of my memory. But you were Barbara Stanwyck. And he said you have to have friends, and it's one-on-one. He talked about the Bohemian Grove. I'm glad I got finally a glimpse in there. But for him, community and tribe and family in almost that Sicilian mafia way was like everything. He didn't pay attention to titles or corporations. Like, it's really family. So I would dare to say, and I love, again, Cindy, what you said about his atoms being in this room. And I think that the community he made, that's getting a little biblical, but like the flesh and blood of him is in the people in this room, and the atoms and the molecules and all of that, and the heavy ions, whatever those are. So I dare say that today, because he's here, you'll have a conversation or 3 conversations this afternoon that may spark in you another fantastic Tombrello-like adventure where you don't know where it's gonna go today. And I think that's the way we can really honor him by continuing his madcap spirit. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll close today with some words from Tom's friend and colleague, Don Burnett.
Now for something entirely different. Sandra Singlow is a tough act to follow. My role here was fairly simple. My connection with Tom was basically as a friend. He was a close friend, a dear friend, and a long-standing friend. I came to Caltech in the fall of 1963 as a postdoc with Willie Fowler in the Kellogg laboratory that Bacher spoke about. Everything he said there is true. Especially in those days, there was morning coffee. And I hated coffee. But I was drawn to the conversations and the discussions. And so now I'm a converted coffee addict. I was especially drawn to a postdoc of about my age from Rice. And so my friendship with Tom Tombrello goes back 50 years. Our families have gotten together on spacings of a few months over that whole course of time. Okay. As Tom became head of the Kellogg lab in the early 1970s, he made a great effort to diversify the lab. This was necessary and appropriate because opportunities in classical nuclear physics were fading. He and everybody else realized that. Okay. He was abroad, and more important, he was a superb physicist. And this led to a series of diverse collaborations with many, many people, but including me. And so there were collaborations between our 2 research groups. In fact, picking up on Sandra Singlow, yes, we used things like fission tracks to study sputtering. And we were fairly happy doing it, actually. We learned how to do depth profiles on lunar samples. We learned how to use nuclear reactions with the tandem vadigraph to measure the elemental abundances of meteorites and therefore the composition of the sun. These were, well, just fun. That's what I mentioned before. Working with Tom and being around him was basically fun. Over the course of the years, as I faced problems and decisions, I would often ask myself, what would Tom think? And unlike Tom's other activities, my issues did not involve the fate of the nation or the fate of the economy. They were just technical. And he seemed to enjoy the simplicity in solving my problems, which were easy compared to the other ones he was dealing with. When we concluded that we needed an entirely new type of mass spectrometer to measure the oxygen isotope, the composition of the solar wind, we went to Tom and bounced off a radical idea from him. What he said would determine whether we did it or didn't do it. But he blessed us. He not only blessed us, he said, I have the person who can build that for you. And he pointed us to a person like Peter Mao, who did this with amazing success. Okay. As has made been clear in the previous talks, Tom was the most decisive person I will ever know. I can say that with some confidence. I don't remember not taking any advice that he ever gave me. Tom had strong opinions, as has been noted. But without exceptions, they were all well thought out. This was never a problem with me because it turned out he agreed or was very easily persuaded to accept 90% of them. I think that. Tom had his life under control, this is clear. He was incredibly well organized. And it's also been noted, this gave him time to be literate and well-read. I especially note that he was among the first to proclaim the virtues of books about a place called Hogwarts, which he thought Caltech should be more like, and a boy named Harry Potter. The world is a better place because Tom Tombrello lived in it, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to close down the program. Between what Stephanie said in the beginning and what I'm saying now, maybe we've bookended this man's very important life. Thank you.